Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a very different video to usual. I actually wasn't planning to wildcard at all, but I thought about it a little bit deeper last night and was looking at the fixture outcomes, the kind of lack of Haaland information, and just ultimately thought that a wildcard 30 would make a lot of sense now. I think that the fixture schedule feels quite set. I'll talk about that in a moment, and ultimately decided to jump on a couple price rises and avoid a couple price falls. So I sold Dango to Sar. Provisionally have also sold Beto to Isak, and that's going to protect my team value a little bit now that I'm on the wild card. But the main reason why I'm wildcarding is, I think, just immediately the chance to improve the team for game week 30 in the light of Haaland being, I would say, most likely out for this game week. My goalkeeping situation isn't necessarily better. I think it's much worse. When I look at defense, probably exactly the same quality-wise, maybe actually worse once again if I wildcard. But it's really the midfield and the forward line that I think I had a much weaker team for compared to a wildcard team where there's a lot more value lost, right? So bringing Salah back into the team, that's, I think, quite significant. Captaining him as well. Having, let's say, the chance to move towards some Southampton players, potentially, not Southampton players, but Crystal Palace players. Also the chance to move into someone like Marmoush alongside Isak as well. And these are lots of transfers, and all these transfers set up for the current curve, which is of course this Newcastle and Crystal Palace double coming in game week 32, but then also Marmoush having a double in game week 33. So those are my current thoughts. In terms of the fixture scheduling impacts, I'll discuss that very quickly. I know some people might be interested as well in how I did in game week 29. If you've been following, unfortunately it did not go very well. I didn't go Bruno in the end. I went for Kluivert to kind of secure a little bit of a wildcard 31 path, and ultimately it didn't work out. Bruno got 17 points, Kluivert got a blank, and that's that, really. We also know that Haaland eventually got injured in the FA Cup, and suddenly the transfers made in game week 30, or rather 29, set up for 30, are a lot worse in comparison, because I now lack a captain, I think, with the sort of valid ability to go against the Salah captaincy this week. So yeah, that's pretty much why I've decided to wildcard. In terms of the fixture scenario, why I've decided to do that, I think it's most important to once again outline. I did do a chip strategy video during the international break. I think that hopefully explained the situation quite well. We also got a West Ham provisional announcement yesterday, sort of confirming that the FA Cup final could create a blank in game week 37 and therefore a double in game week 36. And as we know, City is a team that has a chance still to double twice until the end of the season. We know that the double game week 33 is practically confirmed. It's very hard to fit the reschedulement anywhere else in the schedule because Aston Villa are involved in Europe, and schedule makers aren't going to know the outcome of the Champions League match that they're involved in, despite them being underdogs versus PSG. And the same goes really for Arsenal. But in that context, I think with the City game, we know that they can double twice. And if Haaland is out, Marmoush immediately becomes a much better asset within the game. And it's also just a really good game week for Isak because he's got a home match versus a pretty mediocre level defense in Brentford. So those are kind of my thoughts. When it comes to fixture scheduling, though, as I said, it now seems like we will have probably at least one or two blanks in game week 37 that then create a double game week in 36. But we also know that there are now two blanks in game week 34 that will create a double game week in 33 with two doubles. The expectation is that despite Nottingham Forest advancing within the FA Cup, I think the most likely scenario is that that game, despite being a rescheduled fixture in game week 34, will simply just move towards the midweek in game week 34, which will mean that there's no impacts from an FPL perspective, that the Nottingham Forest just simply play at a different point in time in the week. And that is how I'm planning to go towards this wildcard, because I kept on talking about all the information in terms of how we might get information on the Friday, which means a game week 31 deadline, and therefore means that the game week 31 wildcard might be equipped with a little bit more information. But I think ultimately with these sort of fixtures and the outcomes of the FA Cup, it seems very likely, especially with that sort of announcement from that sort of West Ham press release, that it seems very likely the fixtures will fall exactly where we think they will. So my intuition is that I'm free to wildcard, hopefully, and I won't get into too much trouble for it. And that's kind of my thoughts. So the biggest question I think on the wildcard is, for someone like myself who doesn't have a triple captain, when do we bench boost? Because I think 32 and 33 are both open opportunities. Bench boost 32 looks a little bit worse for wear because it's just one double. But I think one thing to point out is you could justify that the bench boost 32 is a bit stronger because you don't need to set it up too much. Bench boost 33 is another week away. You probably need to make a few free transfers to kind of accommodate for it. And another point to mention with bench boost 33 is I think the keepers on bench boost 33 are much more expensive. You're talking about the likes of Ederson, the likes of Raya, the likes of Martinez, who are much more expensive than keepers like Pope and Henderson. And so when I look at the team that I have right now with the team value that I have, I think I've got a unique opportunity to bench boost on 32, and I probably have more team value than most people playing the game, currently right now. And hopefully that edge will allow me to get a really strong, robust team within my outfield 13 players. And then I can spend a little bit less money on the goalkeepers and still have quality team. So the idea here is to go for Henderson and Pope on a bench boost 32. But I still think both strategies are very close. I think a lot of people might consider bench boost 33 because, once again, it's 2 doubles. You might like them more. I think another point to add when it comes to the bench boost is when you bench boost on 32, you're kind of forced to go towards someone like Henderson. Or maybe you don't go Henderson at all and you go for another Crystal Palace player, but it really comes down to things like where you want to spend your triple Crystal Palace. And I'm comfortable right now going for someone like Henderson who will double on 32 and 33 as a goalkeeper. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with going Pope and Henderson and going for a bench boost 32. So what is my team going to be like? I think the core of a wild card, as I always say, is that you have to think about a wild card as something that is not about creating the perfect team possible, but more specifically thinking about all the valid players, all the valid fixtures that can come. We know that in Gameweek 36, as I mentioned already, if the Gameweek 37 blanks come, we might have an Aston Villa Tottenham game move towards double Gameweek 36, and we might have a City and Bournemouth game as well move to 36. You've also got Crystal Palace and Wolves, also a chance for West Ham and Nottingham Forest. Those are the 4 teams, right, involved in the FA Cup semi-finals. And of course, 2 out of 4 of those teams will go towards a final at Wembley on the 17th of May, which is why we have a potential postponement. So looking at that, I think the odds and just my intuition suggests that Man City will probably head towards the finals, and Crystal Palace have a pretty good chance as well of getting towards the finals. So that makes me really want to go maybe Henderson as a goalkeeper, because I could provisionally have a double game week goalkeeper all the time. With some City players, I think it's a little bit more flexible because it's very hard to know what are the best City players right now. I think Kushanov's minutes are a bit dicey. I think Diaz's minutes are a bit dicey in the sense that over, let's say, every single game until the end of the season, at his age, we've seen a little bit of rotation for Diaz, and that's always happened. They don't have too much depth, though. Guardiola, I think, is absolutely nailed. And then Haaland is just a big question as to when he comes back, when we think he comes back, and whether we get any information at all before the Gameweek 30 deadline. So I think provisionally what I will do with this draft is plan to leave open 1 City spot as of the wild card to leave it for Haaland. I'm not that confident in Foden right now. I really do like Marmoush and I really do like Guardiola, and that's really it. I don't really like too many of the other City picks. When it comes to, let's say, teams like Aston Villa, I think that they're a team that are quite an interesting pick or team to go for. You've got players like Rodgers, Watkins, Konsa, Martinez, who are all quite useful, especially if they're going to double twice, right? So if they double, let's say, on 36 and they double on 33, then suddenly, actually, in hindsight, I suppose, picking a lot of the Aston Villa players will make a lot of sense. At the same time, though, if Crystal Palace do actually win that FA Cup match, then not being too invested in Aston Villa is also quite sensible, since the double game 33 that they actually have isn't particularly good because the 2 matchups are going to be Newcastle and City, and whilst it's nice having Aston Villa players, I don't think they're a must on the wild card. So that's something I'd like to point out, and I think I'd like to go position by position. So in my defense, I plan to, as I said, go for Pope and Henderson. I think those are wild card goalkeepers that are locked in for myself. And then the rest of the defense is questions about how you want to build towards different teams. When I look at a team like Arsenal, I don't think tripling up on the defense is something I really want to do right now. I really do like the idea of keeping a transfer in the future, or rather a spot in the future, to go into Bukayo Saka, hopefully around Gameweek 33. If you look at the fixture scheduling right now that Arsenal have, heading towards this Real Madrid double game, unfortunately, you've got Fulham, then Everton, then you've got Real Madrid, and then Brentford, then Real Madrid, and then Ipswich, which is one of the fixtures in Gameweek 33. My only concern with Saka is I'm not sure if the league is where he's going to expend his minutes. He's most likely going to play 90 minutes for both Real Madrid matches, and I think that's also quite a stretch considering the lengthy injury he's had. But if anyone can do it, I guess Saka, and with the help of a little bit of encroachment from Arteta will get us there. And so I think that his league minutes aren't good enough to justify really being put on a wildcard 30 itself. Neither would I say that about a wildcard 31. So I think the most standard thing that I would like to do is just simply go for Gabriel and Saliba. In another world where, let's say, I planned for a Gameweek 33 bench boost, I think I would have actually gone triple Arsenal defense potentially with, let's say, Raya, Gabriel, and Saliba. I also think Timber is definitely worthy of consideration, because when a lot of people think about the wild card, Saliba is much more expensive than Timber, and you get a massive cost saving there and potentially a player who could play just about the same amount of minutes as Saliba. But there's just a little bit more depth in the fullback positions for Arsenal compared to, let's say, the center back positions. And so I think that's where Timber might lose out potentially if he's, let's say, going to focus more of his minutes playing 90 minutes versus Real Madrid. You can potentially see White and maybe even, let's say, Miles Lewis-Skelly playing a little bit more in the league during that time, whereas I think Gabriel and Saliba will most likely play all the games as they have for the most part this season. Saliba just recently was rested in the second leg versus PSV, but that was a very unique and exceptional circumstance. So right now, I think because my budget allows for it, and I haven't really struggled to, I guess, not create the draft that I want to have. So I do plan on going for Gabriel and Saliba, but as I said, Timber I think is very much worthy of consideration. And of course, if you plan on bench boosting on 33, then I think Raya is the go-to goalkeeper to go for. But I'll be going with Guardiola, Gabriel, and Saliba as my picks from, let's say, City and Arsenal. And then in defense, I'll actually go with Nico Williams and Trippier. I think Nico Williams has very much asserted his spot as that sort of dominant left back within the team. Alex Moreno, a very, very distant second option. And whilst there might be rotation, let's say, here in Game Week 30, I think Nico Williams is most likely going to get the minutes that I want in Game Week 32, which is all I really need him for. He's going to be a part of the bench boost where they face off versus Everton at home, which is a really, really good match. I'm also going for Trippier. I think part of the reason why I would want to go for a bench boost 32 is to get a little bit of upside of those Newcastle players. And with my additional team value, I don't really have to go down towards a Livermore or a Burn, particularly if I have Pope. And I think Trippier is the player to go for. He was on a lot of set pieces in that sort of Carabao Cup final. And I think the biggest question on Trippier is, at his current age, is he fit enough to play all the fixtures for the rest of the season? Does he get 90 minutes every match? I think probably it's unlikely that he gets 90 minutes every match, but that's a possible scenario. But I'd like to have Trippier on my draft regardless, because I'm really only going to be playing him for Game Week 31 and Game Week 32. And after that, I've got the opportunity to just sell someone like Trippier, especially if his minutes don't look particularly good after, let's say, the double, for example. But the core of the defense is really going to be Guardiola, Gabriel, and Saliba for most weeks, and then Nico Williams and Trippier filling in the gaps whenever there's, like, let's say, a bad fixture for a Guardiola, for example. And Arsenal defense, I think, is quite easy to play most weeks up until the end of the season. If I look at most of the fixtures that Arsenal have, it's really only that Liverpool away fixture as we close this league season that I think is not very good for Gabriel and Saliba. And by that time, hopefully my defense will look a little bit different, or I can simply play some of the other players that I have. So that's really it for defense. I think a lot of people consider other defensive options. So other defensive options that I've considered would even extend towards, let's say, as I said, Livramento and Burn if you were looking for cheaper options. Munoz is the option that I really feel bad about not owning on the wild card. But when I thought about it a bit more, I think it was quite necessary, particularly for the bench boost 32 strategy, to actually have two goalkeepers who actually double on 32. And Henderson provides a lot of value for being a double Game Week 33 goalkeeper as well, whereas Munoz doesn't provide the same sort of value within that. And I think with Crystal Palace, one of the tricky things is you've got 5 really good players to go for. I think Henderson, Munoz in those defensive positions. And then when it comes to, let's say, the attacking positions, all 3 attackers in Sarr, Eze, and Mateta, I think are really, really good picks that I wouldn't have any trouble with people going for. And you can only go for 3 out of those 5. And with the bench boost 32 strategy, I think I just have opted to go for Henderson, and therefore I've dropped Munoz. And the only regret, I suppose, looking back at my Game Week 29 team is that Munoz would have been a really nice option to have, but I've decided to drop him on the wild card. In the midfield, though, if we just quickly shift over to that, I think one of the biggest players that won't be within my team is probably Rodgers. I don't know what my exact wildcard draft will be at the deadline, but the draft that I have right now, I've got 0.1 in the bank left. I'm very comfortable with the draft that I've created, and I don't see myself necessarily going for Rodgers as of now. But I think he's once again another really good budget pick that could once again double in Game Week 36 and 33, which is expected. And he could be a better than a pick than someone like Kluivert. But because I have, once again, the budget to keep, I would say, Kluivert on the wild card, I would like to do so. I just think he's such a solid pick. He's got really good minutes now compared to the start of the season and different parts where he was sort of being a sporadic sub. They don't have too much depth, especially if Tavernier is injured, and that's why I quite like Kluivert, especially for this game week here. I don't really want to miss out on Ipswich at home, so Kluivert stays in the team. Palmer and Salah are back in the team. Well, Salah's back in the team, and Palmer's always been here, but you can also say that he's been missing for around, I don't know, 8 to 10 weeks now. This is a really good fixture for Palmer. I think that I feel quite comfortable wildcarding into him because there's no one else at this sort of price point that provides the same amount of value without blocking suddenly, let's say, an Arsenal spot, a City spot, etc. And I think he's still better than, let's say, the likes of Mbumo and Bruno when I look at the fixtures in the immediate term. So that's why I want to go for Palmer. With Salah, it's with my budget, and even despite me selling him recently, I think there's nothing stopping me from going for Salah on this draft. Haaland being out of the game, and this is a big asterisk, of course. If Haaland is suddenly back, then I'm wrong, and this draft will change. But Salah's just an easy captaincy option for this week. He's also a great option to sell off, I think, in Game Week 33 when we have the double there. And if, let's say, Haaland is back for Game Week 33, then he's my cash cow. Same with Palmer too, where I can sell him on that week as well. So I will plan to fill the rest of the team with Eze and Sarr. And the reason why I've gone for Eze and Sarr is, once again, these are players who double-double. And it's really hard, I think, dropping Mateta from the draft. But I just think there are so many good forward picks here on the wild card that a lot of people might disagree with, but I think there are 5 amazing forward picks on the wild card. And I don't think that anyone's going to be wrong for choosing 3 out of 5 of those options. 1 out of 5 has to be Isak. So really, it's actually 2 out of 4, if I'm being fair. And those are kind of my thoughts right now in terms of how we create drops. Another thing with Kluivert is because if City and Bournemouth double in Game Week 36, Kluivert also has the same sort of potential compared to someone like Rodgers, for example, in Game Week 36 and having a double. And potentially he's got a better chance of actually having a double because I think it's more likely that City advance to the finals compared to, let's say, Aston Villa advancing to the finals themselves. Going to the front line, though, I am actually going to go with Isak, Marmoush, and João Pedro. And I made a tweet actually about how I thought João Pedro wouldn't sit on my wildcard draft, but the more I thought about it, actually, it was really between João Pedro and Evan Nilsson. And with Rutter seemingly injured as well, and João Pedro before the international break just getting such good minutes, clocking in 90 minutes per match, and Brighton actually having some really good fixtures as single game week fixtures, I just really like the idea of keeping João Pedro on the draft, and that really is what it comes down to. I think João Pedro and Evan Nilsson are very much interchangeable in a lot of drafts. Some people would like to, I think that the template trio is going to be Mateta, Marmoush, and Isak, and I completely understand that. But I think having some value with Eze and Sarr is totally fine. I'm happy to go against Mateta owners with Eze and Sarr specifically, and João Pedro is, I think, just an option who is, let's say, better than, for example, someone like Morgan Rodgers, who you can play absolutely every single week, and it's just a better auto sub option, for example, as an 8th player. But really, the 8th player in this draft is most likely going to be Sarr. So, for example, on a week like next week, or even this week, it's really a consideration between João Pedro and Sarr as to who I bench, things like that. He provides as a really good option, and more crucially, João Pedro is an amazing pick for the Game Week 32 bench boost. When I compare it to, let's say, maybe Fulham at home, which is the Bournemouth game that Evan Nilsson has, I think that's not the same amount of value. So I quite like the idea of not doubling up on Bournemouth potentially. I might be wrong in the end, especially if Bournemouth get a double in 36, but hopefully the João Pedro would have made enough when it comes to short-term gains to, I guess, outscore Evan Nilsson on the provisional draft that I have. So that's the team that I have, 15 players. It's Henderson, Pope as my goalkeepers, Guardiola, Gabriel, Saliba as my defenders, Trippier and Nico Williams as my 4th and 5th. In the midfield, I'll be playing Salah, Palmer, Kluivert, Eze, and Sarr. And then the forward line is Isak, Marmoush, João Pedro. Now, how will I field the team for Game Week 30? So I think it's quite simple. I think I just play Henderson this week as he's got Southampton, Guardiola, Gabriel, Saliba. So as I said, that's actually worse than my Game Week 29 team, but the dividends really should be earned within the midfield and the forward line. In the midfield, I'll be going with Salah as a captaincy, Palmer, Kluivert, Eze. And the biggest consideration that I've really struggled with right now on this draft is choosing between João Pedro and Sarr as to, who to pick to start for this game week. I actually quite like the idea of actually playing Sarr. So right now I have Sarr starting, and it's just Southampton, right? So I want to take the opportunity there. And then I'll be benching João Pedro this week and then playing Isak and Marmoush. So it'll be a 3-5-2 for this week. The vice captaincy will be on Palmer. The captaincy will be on Salah. The bench order will be Sarr, Trippier, Nico Williams in that order, and Pope also rounding out that team. So that's going to be the wildcard team. It's been a little bit of a long episode, but thank you guys so much for listening. I think the most important thing to mention is if you have already planned for, let's say, a wildcard 31 strategy, your team was in a better position, I think it's totally fine to still keep a Game Week 31 wildcard. It's also fine to even consider something like a Game Week 32 wildcard, but we don't expect to get any more additional fixture information on the Game Week 32 wildcard as it pertains to, let's say, a double Game Week 36 and a blank in 37. So keep that in mind. If we get the fixture information 31, you won't get really any additional information by Game Week 32. The only information you'll get will be things like maybe the Haaland timeline. If another sort of major injury arises as well, you'll have the opportunity to alleviate your team from that as well. So those are the kind of considerations. I have decided to jump the gun here with the Game Week 30 wildcard. I found a drop that I really liked, and I'm most likely going to lock in a bench boost 32 strategy provisionally off the back of this. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.